The entire land was dry, cracked from the heat. Long years of the barons' greed and drought had turned it to dust. But on this small stony plateau, surrounded on all sides, the land was fertile. There were gardens here, a stream flowed, and there was life. This secret oasis was meant to remain a secret, but it had been discovered. At the entrance to the canyon, the screech of wheels and the clatter of hooves rang out. 3 horsemen, shrouded in dust, stopped, their eyes widening in surprise. At the head of the group rode Thomas, the very same Thomas who a year ago had sold his daughter for a handful of coins. Since then he had lost everything. His eyes were filled with greed and his face with malice. He had not returned to save Sarah. He had returned for the reward the Baron had set for the mountain man and wanted to sell Sarah again to pay off his debts. He looked and saw her. At first, he didn't believe his eyes. It was not the clumsy, miserable girl he had abandoned who looked back at him. Before him stood a tall, slender young woman with a firm gaze and glowing health. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now looked at him with a cold, foreign sadness. She held an old but well-maintained musket in her hands. There was no hatred or malice on her face, only emptiness. He felt his heart clench with a fear he had never experienced before. Fear of his own daughter. How did this happen? What happened to the clumsy, frightened girl he left behind? To find out how she became this warrior, we need to go back to the very beginning. A long time ago, on a land scorched by the sun, there lived a man named Thomas. He was a farmer, but now his lands were like a graveyard. A drought, like a plague, had taken the last of his crops, and now his debts were more than he could ever pay. Every day was a torment. He looked at his empty barn and at the only remaining value, his daughter Sarah. She was only 16 years old. He saw in her not just a child, he saw a burden. Her body, large and clumsy, seemed to him a symbol of his own failure. Her stubborn nature and wild, rebellious spirit were a source of his shame. Despair pushed him to a desperate step. He made a deal. He set a meeting. And so, in the deepening twilight, a man appeared on the doorstep of his shack, huge, tall as a mountain, with a face scarred by trials. The mountain man. Thomas took the pouch of coins with a trembling hand. The mountain man cast a quick glance at Sarah, who was standing behind her father, slumped over in resentment. His gaze lingered on her body, but not with greed or lust, but with a cold, assessing calculation, as if she were some valuable but unfamiliar tool. Thomas turned and left, abandoning Sarah alone with the silent stranger. For the first time in her life, her rebellious spirit gave way to panic. Her father, her only family, had just sold her. The next few days were spent on the road. Sarah expected a nightmare, cruel treatment, humiliation, and endless labor. But what awaited her was a long, grueling journey through the wilderness. He didn't carry her luggage or help her, but he didn't rush her either. He walked ahead, moving with incredible ease, while she stumbled over roots and stones. Her clumsy body, which had always been an object of ridicule, now seemed like a double burden. She expected him to scold her, but he never once raised his voice. Their relationship was built on complete silence. When she began to limp, he would stop and point to certain herbs, showing her how to use them to ease the pain. When she was tired, he simply sat and waited, as patient as a part of the landscape. She saw how he navigated the forest as if he knew every bush, every tree. He taught her without words, showing her which berries were safe and which were poisonous, and how to find clean water in the dry ground. Sarah felt her initial fear give way to a deep sense of confusion. This man was not the monster she had imagined. He didn't see her as a burden. He saw a person he could teach. His lessons were harsh but fair. Her body, which had always been her curse, now seemed to be becoming a tool for survival. He wasn't trying to change her. He was showing her how to use what she had. But what was it? The longer she walked, the less she understood and the more her curiosity grew. A few days later, they reached a hidden canyon. Finally, they had arrived. It was not the gloomy hermit's lair she had imagined. In a secret clearing, there were several neat log cabins, a well-tended garden where vegetables grew, and a clear stream where fish sparkled. This was not a beast den, but a real home. She saw people. An old woman with a wrinkled but kind face was tending to flowers. A neat but strong young man was carving a wooden figure. A girl with a limp sat on a log, laughing as she told something to a boy. They were all unlike the people from her past life. They were wounded but not broken. They lived here and they were happy. The mountain man had brought her here. He was not a hermit. He was a leader who had gathered those rejected by society. His scars and silence no longer seemed like signs of cruelty, but marks of endured trials. Every day spent in the secret canyon, Sarah changed. She learned not just to survive, but to live. She helped in the garden, learned to work with wood, and most importantly, felt needed for the first time. Her body, once a source of shame and rejection, now served her. Strong arms carried logs and resilient legs helped with work. She became a part of the community, a part of this new, strange family. One day, the mountain man led her into his cabin. He unrolled a large worn map on a table. It was a plan not just for a settlement, but for an entire network of such sanctuaries. Then he took a folded document from his belt and placed it on the table. It was her bill of sale signed by her father. He slowly tore the paper in half. In that moment, Sarah understood everything. Her father had sold her out of his weakness and debt. But this man had not bought her for punishment. He had bought her to save her. And not just her. His plan was to create a force that could stand against those who so easily took away people's families and hope. He wasn't just building a refuge for outcasts. He was building an army to fight injustice. Without saying a word, he pointed to the map, then to her. He was offering her a choice. She could stay in safety, forever hidden from the world that had rejected her, or she could become a part of his plan. Sarah looked at the torn bill of sale, then at the map, and her heartbeat quickened. For the first time in her life, the choice was entirely her own. She looked up at the mountain man. There was no fear or doubt on her face, only a calm, firm resolve. He saw this, nodded, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Several months of relative peace passed. Sarah became self-assured, mastering all the survival skills. The world beyond the canyon seemed to have forgotten them, and she began to believe that their sanctuary would forever remain a secret. But one morning, the lookout gave a signal. The screech of wheels and the clatter of hooves echoed from beyond the canyon. For the first time in a long time, the peace was broken. The mountain man rose. Everyone in the settlement grabbed a weapon, shovels, axes, bows. Sarah took an old musket she had found in the cabin. She stared at the canyon entrance, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. 3 figures on horseback appeared. In front rode her father, Thomas. His face was pale and angry, and behind him, like shadows, rode 2 armed men. He had found her. He had returned, but not to save her. He had lost all the money, and now wanted to sell her again, or turn her in to collect the bounty for capturing the fugitive mountain man. He looked at Sarah, his eyes widened in surprise. He didn't see the clumsy, frightened girl he had left behind. Before him stood a slender, strong young woman. Her face, once pale with resentment, now glowing with health. Her eyes no longer hid, but looked straight at him with a mischievous spark. He saw not just her transformation. He saw a woman, and for the first time in his life, he felt fear. She was ready to defend her new home. She was ready to fight for her new family. The silence of the secret canyon was shattered by Thomas's voice. He shouted, demanding the return of his property. His hired men to burly men with rifles moved behind him, but their eyes were weary. They saw not just farmers, but a united group of people ready to defend themselves. "I sold you and you're mine," Thomas screamed, his face red with rage. "You're my punishment, my failure." Sarah stood tall, her musket lowered, but her posture showed complete readiness. She looked at her father, and in her gaze there was no hatred, only a deep, sad pity. "You didn't sell me," she said calmly, her voice firm. "You tried to get rid of your own failure. You traded me for money to escape your problems, but I owe you nothing more." The mountain man stood beside her, silent and motionless. His presence was more powerful than any words. The other inhabitants of the canyon surrounded them, each with whatever they could use as a weapon. They were no longer a bunch of outcasts, but a single family. Seeing their resolve, Thomas's hired men began to back away, unwilling to get into a fight. Thomas looked at his daughter, then at the mountain man, then at the torn paper Sarah had pulled from her bosom. On her face, there was no longer a trace of the clumsy, frightened girl he had abandoned. In that moment, he realized that he had lost her forever, and not because she ran away, but because he himself had given her up. The hired men turned their horses and rode off. Thomas was left alone, empty, and defeated. He said no more words. The mountain man pointed him toward the road and Sarah simply watched him leave. She felt no joy or malice, only emptiness. She was now truly free, but this was only the first victory. What will happen next? Will the Baron return? And how will the fight for freedom change them all? To find out what happened next to Sarah and her new family, watch the next part of our An Example.